I'm Ryan from the Burnout Show, and in this video, we're gonna do a little bit of body work and rust repair on this 2000 Jeep Cherokee. So basically, we just need to repair this rust and patch these holes. So we're gonna show you some generic bodywork tips, some rust repair stuff, and just kind of go through the process as we do it. So this is the area that we're trying to repair here. The big issues, this giant hole, these rust bubbles, and this rust patch. So amongst all of this, there's gonna be a couple steps of generally what we're trying to do. The first thing is going to be rust conversion. So we're gonna try to stabilize this rust and all of the rust that's built up around here, and then basically patch this, smooth it over with some body filler, and paint it and make it look okay. It's not gonna look great, it's gonna look okay, it's gonna do the trick. That's the goal. Basically, the first step here is gonna be kind of knocking off a lot of this loose stuff and sanding some of this down. So I've got a wire brush here, and I'm gonna kind of start just knocking off some of these bubbles, you see? We wanna get that down to the smoothest, like smallest amount of metal that we can there. So I'm not sure how well you can see this on the camera, but right under here, there's already some Bondo. So there's been a problem here before in the past, and somebody has already tried to repair it. I'm guessing that they pretty much just slapped Bondo over the rust and didn't really convert the rust first. So that's one of their biggest mistakes, and that's why we're running into these issues again. So we're gonna try to give this a bit more of a better fix that's gonna actually last longer, have some longevity to it. Ideally, a paint scraper would be pretty great at just scooping all this stuff off. I don't have that here, so I'm stuck with a wire brush and a hammer, and so I am gonna kind of lightly tap around here to knock a bunch of this stuff off. Yeah, you can see there's a ton of Bondo under this spot too. So there's been a big rust problem here before, and somebody tried to give it a quick fix, and that leaves us with trying to actually fix the problem here. Now, for this hole in this section of the door, the proper thing to do here would be cut out this whole chunk and then weld in a new piece of metal down there. Because I mean, as you can see here, this frame of the door is completely shot. That is all rusted out. So the proper thing to do here would be to cut all this out and then weld in a new piece of metal and paint that all up. We don't really have that as an option right now. We don't have our welder here, and we are kind of pressed for time. I am also going to be doing a quick fix on this, but should be a little bit better than what was previously done. So I actually don't want to peel off this entire piece. I just want to knock off some of it. So like I said, we do want to get it bare down to like as much as we can, but we don't want to take away this chunk. If we take away this chunk, then that's a huge piece of this door that we're gonna lose. Whereas really we want to use that as support because it's pretty decent. Like obviously it's beat up around the edges, but generally this whole chunk is pretty solid. So what we're gonna do is try to actually maybe squeeze a little bit of Bondo up underneath it just to kind of support it, and then cover over it. I'm gonna go back to my wire brushing. See all this pink stuff? This is all Bondo. And that, ideally, I could get rid of it all and start fresh. Because I mean, you can see how thick that layer is. And that's just basically building up the door from where it's supposed to be. So the more I can get off, the better. All right, so now that I've kind of scratched all the big stuff off, I'm just gonna now take some sandpaper. I'm using a little sanding block here. I'm gonna try to sand it down so it's a little bit smoother, especially around these edges where the paint is. I am actually using 150 grit sandpaper. That is pretty fine sandpaper. I maybe wanted to start with something a little bit less fine, but we're gonna run with this. So now that I've smoothed that down a good bit, I could definitely go more, but I'm not gonna stress about it too much. What I'm actually gonna do now is I'm gonna take some rust converter. I'm using Permatex Rust Dissolver Gel. We have used this before a couple times. We actually have a couple of videos about it. Those will be linked up in the top right corner. If you do wanna see a more in-depth tutorial about how to use this and a more in-depth review of this product specifically, you can click on those videos. Like I said, linked in the top right corner. But I'm gonna use this to kind of convert the rust that's here to try to make it back into strong, decent metal that won't continue to rust in the future. All right, now to be completely honest with you, I did not leave the Permatex on here long enough, but I am impatient and on a time crunch, so I got it on there, let it sit for a few minutes and took it off. If you really want to let it sit for like 5 to 10 minutes, I definitely let it sit for like 3 or 4 minutes. But like I said, I need to do this quickly. So from here, we are going to pretty much start applying our Bondo, our body filler on here to try to just level out and even out all these holes and gaps and everything. But to help out with this corner, I actually had Jay cut me out a little piece of metal that I'm gonna be able to stick up into the door just to give us a little bit of reinforcement here so that there's actually something solid behind the door and the Bondo can hold it in place. Like I said before, the ideal way to do this would be to cut out a huge chunk and then weld a piece of metal in. I'm gonna settle for Bondoing a piece of metal in. Because if I were to try to Bondo without this, there's no way I'm filling in this gap right here. I mean, it's technically possible, it's just really difficult. It's just a big mess. The second best and easiest way to do this is gonna be sticking this little piece of metal in here and then kind of just Bondoing that in. And it's not perfect, certainly not gonna be completely straight, but we are gonna make it work and it's gonna look decent, I think. And it's gonna be strong is the more important part. So let's grab our Bondo and get to work with that. Ideally, when you're using Bondo, you do wanna use clean spreaders, but this is what we got, so I'm gonna make it work. If you don't know what Bondo is or how it works, basically, comes in a little can like this. You can also get a bigger can, but you got a bunch of this gray goopy stuff in there. Now, there's 2 parts to this. You have that gray goopy stuff, and then you have the hardener. When you mix these 2 together, it causes a chemical reaction that makes the whole thing harden together, and that is what allows you to, you know, do stuff like basically replace a metal surface. So again, ideally you want to have this all be clean spreader. You're not supposed to use cardboard technically, but there's really no problem with it. I've always done this on cardboard. All right, so you can see I kind of used that much. You can use more if you do want it to dry faster, or use a little bit less if you don't need it to dry super fast. That is the better way to do it. As we've discussed, I'm trying to do this pretty quickly, so I used a little bit more than you usually should. Now, when you're mixing this all together, it's actually important that you don't over mix it. If you do over mix it, then it just starts to harden too early and it basically gets brittle. It just becomes difficult to use. You're not gonna get a smooth surface out of it when you apply it. So this Bondo wasn't super fresh, so I can already see that it's not gonna apply super smoothly because it wasn't super fresh, but we are gonna go ahead and try to make it work anyways. Part of my little custom job here, I'm actually gonna put a little bit of Bondo on the piece of metal that's gonna go inside the door to help kind of solidify it as it goes in, as I squeeze it in there. And then I will spread the rest of this over the whole thing. So now that the Bondo is dry, I'm gonna grab some sandpaper and try to sand it down. The goal is to make it pretty smooth. I'm guessing that I'm gonna have to hit this with a little bit more Bondo afterwards just to smooth everything out, but we're gonna try to sand it down just to see how smooth we can get this and see if I need to hit it with more Bondo. Little helpful tip for when you're sanding Bondo: you should definitely wear a mask or a respirator of some kind, especially if you're using a power sander, because this stuff is not good to breathe in. All right, so now that I've got this sanded down pretty smooth, I am gonna apply a bit more Bondo, because I'm sure you can tell there's a couple spots like these little indents that are lower. They're not level with the rest of the Bondo. So I'm gonna try to even those out. Now, this is why it's important to use a wider spreader, because if you have a wider spreader, you're gonna be able to get more of the surface that you're trying to Bondo all at the same time. So it's actually going to smooth this all out. It's gonna level it out. Now, these gaps are created when you have to go over a spot multiple times, and then it actually pulls away some of the Bondo that was there, and then it's not level anymore. So that's why it's better to use that wider one like I was talking about before. And when you're using the wide one, you do wanna try to use big strokes and cover as much of the surface as possible. Just again, in an effort to make it more even and easier for you. So I'm gonna now try to fill in a bunch of these spots, just make it a little bit smoother, and we'll see if I'm able to do that. So you can see this batch of Bondo is a lot pinker than the previous batch because I used a lot more hardener in it, so it would dry faster. When you do that, it does become a little bit harder to use. So as it dries, you know, it becomes tougher and it doesn't want to spread out. So like over on this side, you can see it's a little bit rougher in the parts that I tried to spread later on. So that's why I was saying earlier that it's important to not use too much hardener, but I need this to dry really fast. So that's why I did use a lot of hardener on it. This Bondo is now dried and hardened, so I'm gonna go ahead and sand it down, make it pretty smooth. And this should be my last coat of Bondo. I shouldn't need to do any more. Probably not gonna be perfectly smooth, but I mean, if you look at the rest of the car, neither is that. So we're gonna go ahead and start to sand this down now. So it's certainly not perfect by any means. I mean, you can still see there's a couple of rough spots in here, but I mean, it's pretty decent. It's about on par with the condition of the rest of the car. So once we are done applying Bondo and you're happy with how smooth it is, then it's basically time to start painting the car. From here, we are going to actually hit it with some primer. This car is actually painted using bed liner, so not like normal high quality car paint. So it literally is just in a spray paint can. So painting the car is gonna look a little bit different for you, but painting the car for me is actually gonna be pretty easy. I'm just gonna hit it with some spray paint primer and then hit it with the bed liner. But I'll start by masking the area around it. I'm not gonna go crazy with this because I don't really care if the door gets a little extra primer on it, but I will mask this door and this bottom edge over here, as well as the fender guard. So now that I've got this all taped up around the outside, I'm just gonna hit it with some spray paint. Like I said, this is the primer spray paint. So it is a layer of primer that I'm gonna put down before we actually spray it with the bed liner. Now we just gotta let that dry. All right, so I'm actually gonna wrap up the video here. You don't need to watch me spray paint bed liner onto the car. That's kind of just a little overview of how to do some easy patchwork, easy body work on a car. A little bit of rust repair, a little bit of Bondo, and then a little bit of paint. Like I said, this is by no means perfect. It's barely decent, but it's really all I needed for what we're trying to do with the car, so it's good enough. But like I said, that's gonna do it for this video. So if you did enjoy this video or you did find it helpful, make sure you hit that like button and definitely subscribe if you want to see more content like this. But that is gonna do it for this video. So thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.